by a majority vote, and not by a supermajority. I believe that's our constitutional obligation. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Georgia is recognized.
Madam President, I rise briefly to address a few remarks made by the distinguished senator from Iowa and to compliment my colleague from Tennessee. But first, I think we should, all these talks about our founding fathers and our Constitution, if our founding fathers had not intended for supermajorities to determine certain acts of this Congress, why would two-thirds of us have to vote to pass a constitutional amendment and three-fourths of the states have to vote to ratify one? I think that showed the intent. If our founding fathers had not intended for minority representation to exist, Iowa wouldn't have two senators like California, or like everybody would have a proportionate number of senators. And finally, and most importantly, with regard to the question of we're the only democracy in the world to have a rule where majority rules, the fact of the matter is that may be true. We're also the richest, safest, most prosperous democracy in the world, and that's a lot to do with the way we govern ourselves. So I wanted to make those 3 points if I could. I want to congratulate Senator Wyden, Senator McCaskill, and Senator Grassley on what I think is a very appropriate amendment to make sure we have total transparency in our process of holds in the United States Senate. I think that is right, and that's exactly what the American people would express. And lastly, I want to thank the senator from Tennessee and the senator from New York. I think in the last few weeks they've done a lot of work, yeoman's work as a matter of fact, to make sure that this Senate doesn't rush to judgment and make a mistake that would not be in the interest of the institution or the American people. The Senate, in the end, is all about senators putting their shoulder to the grindstone and making things work. And I think in this case, there's no question Senator Alexander has done exactly that. I wanted to compliment on his work and yield back the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President, I want to thank all the senators who have come down on this debate, and these are just a couple of cleanup housekeeping things that I'm doing. First of all, the charge was made that we're trying to make the Senate like the House, and rather than get in a long debate there, I would just ask unanimous consent to put Federalist Paper 62 and a letter from a number of scholars that testified before the Rules Committee. Ask unanimous consent to put those in the record.
Without objection, they'll be included in the record.
And I have also have a full statement because of the on this particular issue, and others have a full statement that answers that specific charge, Senate into House, and I would ask that that statement, full statement, be put in the record as if read at this point.
Without objection, the statement will be included in the record.
And then there was also to the first UC with the Federalist Paper, there was also an additional statement that backed that up, and I ask unanimous consent to put that in.
Without objection, included in the record.
Madam President, we're at this point in the debate, the concluding point in the debate, where I think it's very appropriate to just thank staff. My two staff members that have worked the hardest, all my staff have worked very hard on this, but Matt Nelson and Tim Woodbury deserve individual recognition for their tireless work on this. I know as a result of this we put a lot of pressure on the Rules Committee. Jean Bordowich and her whole crew over there has done a great job. And I know for the parliamentarian shop that's headed by Alan Fruman, we've also had great assistance from them in terms of answering questions and working with them. So I would applaud Alan and all of the parliamentarians. At several places in the record, a variety of different items were mentioned, and to clarify the record, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a New York Times editorial from January 25th. That's the first one. The second one, a Harvard Law and Policy Review article that I authored. Number 3, quotes from constitutional scholars and conservative scholars on the constitutional option. That's number 3. And then number 4, an op-ed from the Washington Post titled Fixing Broken Senate Rules.
Without objection, they'll be included in the record.
And then finally, I just once again want to thank our leaders here, Lamar Alexander, Chuck Schumer, both working on the Rules Committee, I think have done a remarkable job in terms of negotiating. Leader Reid and Leader McConnell have made a decision which was announced earlier today, and that decision was to change some of the rules, to let us vote on some changes to the rules. And also, I think one of the most significant things, and I know Senator Alexander has mentioned this, is to try to change behavior. And more than anything, I think that could be very significant, as they have talked and said, we'd like to do this differently. We'd like to get back to the Senate functioning where we bring things up, we debate them, we allow robust debate, we allow the amendment process to work forward. And as I know Senator Alexander said at one point in his heritage speech, you know, the Senate is a shadow of itself. Well, we want to get back to that Senate with that robust debate and amendment, and I think both sides have tried to pull that together. So with that, I would just say I very much hope that this is a new day in the Senate as a result of this, and with that, I yield the floor.
The senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam President, I've earlier congratulated Senator Udall, and I have earlier congratulated Senator Udall and Wyden and Merkley and Senator Harkin for stimulating a good, full discussion about 2 objectives. 1, how do we make the Senate the best possible place to deal with serious issues that come before our country, because we have plenty of them right now, starting with our national debt and the high unemployment rates. They've done a good job of that, and they've led us today to adopt what I believe are 2 important steps, one having to do with secret holds, another having to do with taking time away that might otherwise be better used by reading by having the clerk read an amendment. It's also produced a couple of other things. One is the broadest support we've had in a number of years on dealing with the persistent problem of the difficulty a president has in staffing the government. Senator Reid and Senator McConnell, when they were whips, tried to deal with this. We had 3 bipartisan breakfasts on this, working with the White House 2 years ago. Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins, who are the committee chairs, have tried to deal with this, and we've all failed so far. But Senator Schumer and I will be introducing a bill which we'll be discussing with committee chairmen and ranking members especially, and it will have the support of the leaders, Senators McConnell and Reid, and it will have the active involvement of Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins. And what we'll hope to do is 2 things. One is reduce the number. Senator Harkin spoke about this a little earlier. He's a chairman. He's been a ranking member and a chairman. I mean, he's basically saying we don't need to spend our time here having Senate confirmation of hundreds of boards and commission members and the PR official for some department. We ought to focus our attention on jobs and debt and terror and the issues that affect the American people. And perhaps we can deal with that. And the second thing we should do is to end this practice of making it so that citizens who are invited by the President of the United States to serve in our government to become innocent until nominated. We drag them through a maze of conflicting forms, many of them created by the executive branch, many of them created by us, that trap them and trick them and embarrass them, and it's surprising anybody will accept the opportunity. I remember Majority Leader Howard Baker was nominated by President Bush to go to Japan. Everybody in the Senate knew him very well. He was voted most admired senator by senators on both sides of the aisle in the 80s. Cost him $250,000 to fill out the forms so that he could be the ambassador to Japan. I could give many examples of this, but Washington, D.C. has become the only place where you hire a lawyer and an accountant and an ethics officer before you find your house and put your kid in school if you come to work here. And we need good people in the government, and we need to be able to attract them here. And we should fix that. And I greatly appreciate the work that Senator Schumer and Reid and McConnell and Lieberman and Collins and others have done. And I hope our colleagues will join in bringing this in an expedited way. I ask unanimous consent to include at the end of my remarks I made on March 9, 2009 on the Senate floor entitled, "Innocent Until Nominated."
Without objection, that will be included in the record.
And only two other things, Madam President.
You're finished.
I want to congratulate Senator McConnell and Senator Reid for leading us in this way. Changing rules is an important step forward. I do not in any way want to diminish what I believe we're about to do here. But we need a change in behavior more than we need a change in rules. And this has caused us to talk across party lines about what we want. And I think what we want is what Senator Udall said as a whole. We'd like for most bills to come through committee. Most bills then to come to the floor. Most bills then to have a chance for most senators to be able to offer most of their amendments and then to get votes. That's what we should try to do most of the time. Sometimes the Republicans will want to repeal the health care law and the Democrats will use all of their resources to defeat it. And the Democrats in the House will send over a bill to repeal the secret ballot in union elections, and Republicans will try to defeat that. So we'll use all our resources there. But that won't be most of the time. And most of the time, we will be able to do our jobs better to represent the people who sent us here. So I hope that those who have provoked this discussion feel a sense of satisfaction about what they've done, even though I know that in every case they didn't get exactly what they wanted. And then finally, there is a long response to Senator Harkin's excellent comments on his amendment, which he's been fighting for 16 years. But with a couple of exceptions, I'll put it in the record. And I ask unanimous consent to include at the end of my remarks an address I made to the Heritage Foundation on January the 4th. Senator Harkin is very straightforward.
Without objection, included in the record.
Thank you. About his difference of opinion. He believes that we ought to bring every debate eventually to 51 votes. And so I would respectfully term his amendment as sort of a hang me now or hang me later. I mean, you know that eventually it's not 60 votes you're going to require, it's 51. He says that's the way it ought to be. I disagree. So do many others, and I'll just cite two distinguished senators who spoke on the floor of the Senate about 5 years ago when a number of Republicans got it in their mind that they would like to change the filibuster rule as it affects judges. This is what the Democratic whip, Harry Reid, said then. The filibuster is far from a procedural gimmick. It's a part of the fabric of this Constitution that we call the Senate. For 200 years, we've had the right to extend the debate. It's not a procedural gimmick. Some in this chamber want to throw out 214 years of Senate history in the quest for absolute power. They want to do away with Mr. Smith, as depicted in that great movie, being able to come to Washington. They want to do away with the filibuster. They think they're wiser than the Founding Fathers. I doubt that's true, said Senator Reid. And then another senator, the senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, then of the majority, referring then to the Republican majority. Then of the majority, said Senator Obama, chooses to end the filibuster. If they choose to change the rules and put an end to democratic debate, then the fighting and the bitterness and the gridlock will only get worse. Well, I would suggest, Madam President, that as a result of this discussion, we preserve the Senate as an institution, a forum for deliberation, where minority rights are protected. But we've also taken some important steps forward, or are about to, with rules changes, to make the function better. And we've reached a consensus among ourselves, informally anyway, that's represented by the colloquy placed in the record, that will be placed in the record by Senator Reid and Senator McConnell. And so what we really want is an opportunity to represent the American people the way they sent us here to do it, which is to take these difficult pieces of legislation, bring them through committee, bring them to the floor, and for us to have a chance to amend and debate and vote on them. That would be most of the time. And some of the time, we'll exercise all of our minority and majority rights to defeat a bill, because that's also what we're sent here to do. So I thank the senators for this spirited debate, and as far as I know, there are no more speakers on the Republican side.
Thank you. The senator from
Thank you, Madam President.
New York is
I believe I'm the last speaker after this very good debate preceded by months and months of serious discussion. And I think every one of us is better that we went through this process. We understand the Senate better. We have deeper feelings about this hallowed institution, about what it has done and what it can do, and what is wrong with it as well. And I think every one of us agreed that the Senate needed to be fixed, and every one of us also agreed that we did a lot last year despite the fact that it was broken. And we had different paths to fix it. But fix it we must, and fix it we will. And I would just say this. Obviously, there are going to be some rules changes and some statutory changes. But a lot of what will make this work is the agreement, informal but serious, between Senators Reid and McConnell that Senator Alexander and I were part of. And I would say to my colleagues, hopefully we are opening up a bit of a new era where bills are allowed to come to the floor except under extraordinary circumstances, where amendments are allowed to be added to those bills except under extraordinary circumstances, and there is vigorous debate. I would ask my colleagues to forbear. It's very easy for any senator to stand up and bollocks up the whole works. But the spirit of this new agreement says, think twice, 3 times, even 4 times before you do, because that was the path that led us to the dysfunction. I, too, want to just once again salute my colleagues, Senator Harkin, Senator Udall, Senator Merkley, for the great job they did. Senator Wyden and Senator McCaskill and Senator Grassley will have a dream of theirs enacted into the rules momentarily. This has been a fine debate. I would hope and pray. I don't think the talking filibuster cuts against anything my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said, and I'm going to proudly vote for that provision. And maybe, miracles of miracles, it'll get 2/3, but at least there'll be a vote, and maybe we can work towards that in the future. I also do believe that the proposal to not invoke the constitutional option for this Congress and next Congress gives us some time to figure all this out without closing the door on it forever, because some on our side, I know, are worried about that. So let us go forward in a spirit of comity that we have seen since the lame duck session. Let us go forward in the bipartisan way that we've worked on these rules changes, and move forward in the next few months and try to legislate in the way many of us who have been here longer than a few years used to love and enjoy and relish. If we can bring those times back, the Senate will be a better place for every one of us, no matter our party or our ideology. So I thank all of my colleagues, my colleague from Tennessee, the 2 leaders who stepped up to the plate, and the so-called Young Turks, some of whom have been here much longer than I have been, for importuning us to act. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
the majority leader is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to all remaining time be yielded back, that there be 2 minutes equally divided prior to each vote. Further, that all roll call votes after the first be for 10 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
Have the yeas and nays been ordered?
Yes, they have. The question is on the adoption of Senate Resolution 28. Under the previous order, a vote of 60 is required for adoption of this resolution. There are 2 minutes evenly divided. The senator from Oregon.
Madam President, there has been much discussion about the proposed rules reforms and how far they go. To those who say that this resolution doesn't go far enough, I would ask, why have the Friends of Secrecy fought so hard for so long to allow senators to anonymously block legislation and nominations? The fact is, this resolution deals with a sweeping, almost unparalleled legislative power, the ability of one United States senator to anonymously block a bill or a nomination from going forward. That's not right. Senator Grassley, Senator McCaskill, and I have worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to say that if you want to exercise that extraordinary power, you ought to do it in sunlight. There ought to be public disclosure. There ought to be transparency. I yield the remainder of our time to Senator Grassley, who has championed this cause with Senator McCaskill, and I thank him for all his efforts.
Thank you. The senator from Iowa is recognized.
Madam President and my colleagues, the time has come to end secrecy on the floor of the House of Representatives. The time has come for senators who think they ought to put a hold on a bill to be able to continue to put a hold on a bill or a nomination. But it's also time to show that you have guts enough to let the people know who you are, and more importantly, to let your colleagues know who you are. So if there's something wrong with a piece of legislation or a nomination, we can find out what it is and move the business of the Senate ahead. This is something that's going to make the Senate a much more efficient place to work and get the people's business done, and do one of the most important things we can do is that the public's business ought to be public. I yield the floor.
The question is on the adoption of the resolution. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Dodd. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand.
I'm an aye,
Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Bingaman, Blunt, Boxer, Cornyn, Grassley, Inhofe, Isaacson, Klobuchar, Lautenberg, Levin, Lugar, Manchin, McCaskill, Merkley, Moran, Murkowski, Murray, Reno, Nevada, Schumer, Stabenow, Udall of New Mexico, Whitehouse, and Wyden. No senator voted in the negative. Mr. Kyle? Aye. Mr. Rubio? Aye. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Cochran? Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Vitter? Mr. Vitter, aye. Mr. Bennett? Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Coates? Mr. Coates, aye. Mr. Carey? Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown in Massachusetts, aye. Mr. McConnell? Mr. McConnell, aye. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Enzi, aye. Mr. Corker? Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Coons? Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Johans, aye. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, aye. Mr. Toomey? Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Ms. Snow? Ms. Snow, aye. Mr. Coburn? Aye. Ms. Collins? Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Lieberman? Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Dement? No. Mr. Casey? Aye. Mr. Leahy? Mr. Leahy? Aye. Mr. Crapo? Aye. Mr. Thune? Aye.
Well, we're going to give you the tally.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? Aye.
And we go from SRES.
Mr. Conrad?
Next one's SRES 29.
Aye. Mr. Rockefeller? Mr. Rockefeller? Aye.
There's nothing there than being
Mr. Burr? Aye. Mr. Pryor? Aye. Mr. Shelby? Aye. Mr. Sessions? Mr. Sessions? Aye. Oh, Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka. Aye. Mr. Bekich. Aye. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hatch. Aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts. Aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven. Aye. Mr. Wicker. Aye. Mr. Webb. Aye. Mr. Bozeman. Aye. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska. Aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Aye. Mr. Cardin. Aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin. Aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus. Aye. Mr. Kirk. Aye. Mr. Ensign? No. Mrs. Shaheen? Aye. Harkin? Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Chambliss, aye. Mr. Risch? Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Mikulski? Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mrs. Hagan? Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Carper? Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye.
She's not watching.
Ms. Landrieu, aye.
Okay, okay. Are there any senators who wish to vote or to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 92, the nays are 4. The 60-vote threshold having been achieved, the resolution is agreed to. Without objection. The question is on the adoption of Senate Resolution 29. The question is on the adoption of Senate Resolution 29. under the previous order, 60 votes are required for adoption. Who yields time?
Madam President,
The senator from Colorado.
Madam President, the resolution before us, which I introduced, would encourage senators to file their amendments 72 hours in advance of a vote to ensure that members have time to review it. But then it would also delay the practice of calling for an out-loud reading of the amendment in front of us. And it addresses a concern I think we all have about the amendment process. When a full reading of the amendment's been called for, it ties our Senate into knots. It's a spectacle. The clerks are standing up here and reading amendments for hours to an empty chamber. My amendment would prevent needless delays by waiving the live reading of an amendment when the text has been available long enough for all of us to look it over. It would have to be submitted 72 hours in advance. So I'd ask for the yeas and nays. I hope for an overwhelmingly bipartisan approval of this important change to the Senate rules.
President. Madam President.
The senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Madam President, this amendment puts into effect what we called,
While the senator from Tennessee
what
speaks.
Republicans often called during the health care debate the Bunning rule, which is if it's not on the Internet or not available for 72 hours, it shouldn't be brought up. We think this is a sensible, I think this is a sensible amendment, and I urge a yes vote.
Madam President,
The senator from Colorado.
I'd ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Begich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bigeman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Yeah, you got him. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Conrad. Sir. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Not yet. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski.
Oh, look, we're together.
Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow. Now I do.
Yeah, it is a no.
I did, sir.
Okay, we're like 4 of us voting at the same time.
Yeah, I gotcha. I got you. Yeah. Oh, good. Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey.
3 plus 5, 8.5.
Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden.
Next one, Doug.
Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Baucus, Begich, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Blunt, Bozeman, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Burr, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Chambliss, Coates, Cochran, Conrad, Coons, Durbin, Enzi, Franken, Gillibrand, Graham, Grassley, Harkin, Hoven, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Johnson of South Dakota, Kerry, Kirk, Klobuchar, Kyle, Landrieu, Lautenberg, Leahy, Lieberman, Lugar, Manchin, McConnell, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Moran, Murkowski, Murray, Nelson of Florida, Portman, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Roberts, Rockefeller, Sanders, Shaheen, Shelby, Snow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Webb, Wicker, and Wyden. Mrs. Hagan. Aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Senators voting in the negative: Coburn, Cornyn, Crapo, Dement, Ensign, Hatch, Inhofe, Lee, Paul, Risch, Rubio, Sessions, Thune, Toomey, and Vitter. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Mr. Corker, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. I didn't. Mr. Corker, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, aye.
Are there any senators wishing to vote or to change their vote? Well, if not, on this vote, the yeas are 81, the nays 15, the 60-vote threshold having been achieved, the resolution is agreed to. The question is on the adoption of S-Res 8. Under the previous order, an affirmative vote of two-thirds of the senators voting is required for adoption. There are 2 minutes evenly divided.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.